What if Walder Frey died before the Red Wedding, and his heir honored the marriage pact with Robb Stark? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The river runs dark beneath the twins on the last night of the old lord's life. The twins have stood here for 600 years, two castles so nearly identical that a man crossing the bridge for the first time sometimes cannot tell whether he has arrived or is merely on his way. The bridge itself is the point. It is the only practical crossing on this stretch of the Trident, and every lord who has ever needed to march north or south has paid for the privilege of it. The Freys have grown rich on that toll. Lord Walder Frey has been collecting it for 60 years, and in all that time he has never once let anyone forget what the crossing is worth. He is 92 years old, and he is dying. Not by the sword, not by poison or treachery. Walder Frey is dying the way very old men die when their bodies have simply run out of reasons to continue. He has spent most of the past month in his great chair in the hall of the East Castle, because walking has become a negotiation, and standing has become a war. His hands lie in his lap. The skin is liver-spotted and loose, pulled thin over knuckles that ache when the weather turns. His eyes are still sharp. They have always been the sharpest thing about him. They will be the last thing to go. One of his sons sits near the fire, watching the old man for signs. Tonight there are no signs, just the sounds of the river outside and the fire burning down and the old man breathing, slowly, in his chair. His steward comes in an hour past midnight. "My lord, it's late. Will you go to your chambers?" Lord Walder opens one eye. "I know how late it is. I've been alive longer than you've been counting." The steward withdraws. The fire burns lower. Walder Frey falls asleep in his chair, as he has done 100 nights before. When the dawn comes through the eastern windows, the serving girl who arrives to add wood to the fire stops 2 steps past the door and does not move for a long time. He is still in the chair. He looks as though he is sleeping. He is not sleeping. The news moves through the twins, the way bad news always moves through a castle, faster than the messengers who carry it. By the time the steward has confirmed what the serving girl already knew, half the household has heard. By the time the Meister has come and gone, all of them have. Lord Walder Frey is dead. Within the hour, his family knows it. They number over 100 by the loosest count, the sons and the grandsons, and the daughters and the bastards and all the intertwined lines of descent that a man accumulates when he outlives 9 wives and shows no sign of stopping. They come from their chambers and their barracks, from their beds and their breakfasts, gathering in the corridors and the yard in loose and restless groups. Their faces move through grief and shock and something that is neither one, the calculating look of people who are already working out what comes next. Some of them are weeping. Most of them are watching. Stevron Frey is 58 rooms and a long corridor away from where his father died, and he is walking when the messenger finds him. Walking slowly, one hand trailing along the wall where the stone is cool against his palm, because the wound from Oxcross didn't kill him, though more than one Meister expected otherwise. It did not heal cleanly. There is a stiffness in his right side that sharpens when he moves fast, and so he does not move fast. He is a polite man in his 60s, grey at the temples, careful in everything he does. He has been told all his life that he resembles his father. He has never decided how to feel about that. The messenger is breathing hard. "Sir Stevron, your lord father." Stevron reads the man's face before he finishes the sentence. "How long ago?" "The serving girl found him at first light, my lord. Sometime in the night, the Meister believes. In his chair." Stevron says nothing for a moment. He looks out the narrow window at the bridge below, at the river running grey in the autumn morning. He has been waiting for this day for years. He thought he knew how it would feel when it arrived. He does not feel what he expected. "Send word to my brothers," he says finally. Tell them I am coming to the hall. He is the Lord of the Crossing now. He did not choose to be. The office does not require choosing. The hall is crowded when he arrives. His brothers and their sons stand watching the empty chair where the old man used to sit, someone having covered it with a length of black cloth. Stevron takes the chair beside it and calls for quiet, and the hall gives it to him. He is not a loud man. He has never needed to be. He tells them what will happen next. The Meister will prepare the body, 3 days of mourning, no decisions of consequence taken in that time. He looks at his brothers as he says each thing. He says each thing clearly enough that no one asks him to repeat it. When the hall empties, he goes to his father's solar. It is a small room at the top of the east tower, close and warm, smelling of tallow and old parchment. There are letters everywhere. Walder Frey corresponded with half the lords of the realm, or had his Meister do it for him, and he kept everything. Stevron sits at his father's desk and begins working through it. Grain contracts, river toll agreements, a long-running dispute with Lord Mallister over the use of the western bank. He sets each thing aside in its own pile, working methodically through the morning while the household mourns around him. The sun has moved well past noon when he finds the letters that were not filed with the rest. They are in the lower drawer of the desk, underneath a worn leather ledger that does not appear to record anything. 3 letters, each with a different seal. He recognizes the first one before he even picks it up. The golden lion of House Lannister, pressed into red wax. He reads the first letter slowly, then the second, which bears the flayed man of House Bolton on grey wax. Rose Bolton is a man Stevron has met twice and does not entirely trust. He is quiet in the way that Wells are quiet. The Bolton letter is shorter than Tywin's, more direct, and somehow worse for that directness. The third letter is his father's own reply, in that cramped, spidery hand Stevron has known since childhood. When he finishes the third letter, he sets all 3 down on the desk and sits very still. The plan is not complicated. It does not need to be. A wedding feast at the twins. Robb Stark, the king in the north, arrives with his host, receives bread and salt from his hosts, and believes himself a guest. When the moment comes, the musicians play a particular song. A Lannister song. One that everyone in the realm knows the meaning of. And then the doors close. What happens after the doors close is set out clearly in Tywin Lannister's careful hand and more directly still in Rose Bolton's, and Stevron does not need to read it twice to understand what his father agreed to. He reads it twice anyway. He sits for a long time in his father's chair. He thinks about the toll and the bridge, and the long, careful business of never choosing the losing side until the winning side was obvious. The practice his father turned into an art. He thinks about the name they have for the old man in the stories people tell. The late Lord Frey, always the last one in, always watching until the outcome was certain, and then making very sure he had been there from the beginning. He thinks about bread and salt. He has fought in 1 war. He has buried 2 wives and 3 children. He has kept his counsel and done what was asked of him. And all his life, the thing he has wanted more than anything else is to die in his bed, quietly, without screaming. He picks up the 3 letters again. He reads them from the beginning. There is nothing he misunderstood the first time. He sets them down. Outside the window, the trident moves beneath the bridge the same way it always has. The same river, the same crossing, the same castle and the same family, and the same name above the gate, the same office he has just inherited from the man who built this particular arrangement. Stevron reaches for a blank sheet of parchment. Then he stops, with his hand above it. He sits in his father's chair with the 3 letters in front of him, and the river running outside, and most of a life's worth of caution, telling him to think very carefully. He thinks about the kind of lord he wants to be when the histories remember this day. He reaches for the parchment again. The candles have burned down to stubs before Stevron Frey sets the letters aside. He has read them 5 times. He is not sure what he expected the 5th reading to reveal that the first 4 did not. The words are the same words. The plan is the same plan. He lights a new candle from the dying stub of the old one and sits back in his father's chair and looks at the 3 sheets of parchment arranged on the desk. And he thinks. The solar is cold. He did not call the servants back to build up the fire, because there is a part of him that feels the cold is appropriate. The windows are dark. The river outside is invisible except as a sound, the low, steady pull of water past stone. He has been sitting here since the sun was high. It is now very late, and the thing that sits at the center of his thinking, the thing he cannot move past, is not the names or the scale of it, or even the treachery in the plain sense of that word. It is the bread and salt. That is the detail he keeps returning to. Not the armies, or the gold, or Tywin Lannister's careful hand. Those are the mechanics of power, and power has its own mechanics, and Stevron has watched those mechanics his entire life. His father understood them better than most. But the bread and salt is not power. The bread and salt is something older. In the 7 Kingdoms, a host who offers bread and salt to his guests is making a promise that is not a political promise, not the kind that can be negotiated when circumstances change. It is a promise to the gods. Both the old gods and the new are witnesses to it, and both hold the host accountable if he breaks it. It is the most ancient law of Westeros, older than the faith, older than the first lords, older than most of the stories men tell about why they do what they do. It is the reason a man can travel to a strange castle and eat at a stranger's table and sleep without his armor on. Take it away, and you take away the table. You take away the door that opens. You take away the compact that allows lords to meet at all, to send their sons as wards, to send their daughters as wives, to march through each other's lands without their swords already drawn. You take that away, and what you have left is not a civilization. His father agreed to take it away. Stevron has spent 60 years watching the old man work. He knows the game, the late arrival, the careful calculation, the patient waiting until the outcome was clear enough to commit to. The late Lord Frey, they called him, and not with any great affection. Always the last one through the door, always waiting to see which way the wind was going before he put out his hand for it. It was not courage, it was not honor, but there was a kind of survival in it, the survival of a man who understood that the first priority in any war is to still be breathing when it is over. This is something different. This is not surviving. This is building a trap out of bread and salt and a wedding feast, and then sitting at the head of the table while the guests walk in. Stevron thinks about the young wolf. He has met Robb Stark twice. The boy is 17 and already a king, already a commander who has not lost a battle. When the Stark raised his banners for the march south, Stevron rode at the head of the Frey column, not to see which way it was going, but because the cause was right and the men were worth riding for. He rode to Oxcross. He fought there. He took his wound doing it, and the wound still pulls when he breathes wrong, and he would take it again. His father did not ride to Oxcross. His father sat in the twins and collected his toll and wrote letters to Tywin Lannister. He picks up the 3rd letter again, the one in his father's own cramped, spidery hand, and reads the part about the signal. When the time comes, the musicians will play the Rains of Castamere, the ballad that every man in the realm knows by its first note, the song about what happens to a house that crosses the Lannisters, the song that has become a kind of announcement. The musicians will play it, the soldiers hidden in the walls will come out, and the guests who ate bread and salt will be made to understand what that was worth. His father signed his name to this. Stevron sets the letter face down and does not read it a 6th time. He calls for the Maester. The man arrives with the harassed look of someone expecting nothing good from a summons this late, which under the circumstances is probably correct. Stevron waves him to the chair across the desk. 2 ravens. Now, I will dictate. My lord, it is the middle of the night. I know what hour it is. Sit down. The first letter goes to the camp of Robb Stark, the king in the north, and of the Trident. Stevron dictates carefully. He names the plan his father agreed to. He names Tywin Lannister and Lord Bolton as the men his father made the arrangement with. He says that Walder Frey, now Lord of the Crossing, does not intend to carry out that arrangement, and that the king's host should not come to the twins expecting a wedding feast. He says the Frey alliance, for what it is worth, still stands. He signs it with his full name and title. The second letter goes to Riverrun, the Tully seat, so that the lord of that castle can ensure the warning reaches the right hands. He writes the same warning in the same plain words. He does not apologize. There is no apology that covers what his father agreed to. He simply tells the truth, and trusts the truth to travel. When both letters are sealed, and the maester has gone, the door opens without a knock. His brothers fill the doorway, 4 of them, with more shapes in the corridor behind. They have the look of men who reached a decision among themselves while Stevron was occupied. He knows that look. He has watched it form on their faces 100 times. The one at the front speaks first. He is the kind of Frey that Stevron has always found difficult. Large, certain of himself, quick with an argument. We know what you've done, he says. The steward has ears. Then you know what the letters say. You've warned the Stark. The brother steps into the room. You've given away the arrangement. There is gold in this, Stevron. Land. Tywin Lannister does not make those offers twice. You are throwing away everything the old man spent the last months building. He built it on bread and salt, Stevron says. That is the part you are not saying. He built it on offering guest right and then violating it. The arrangement was made. He agreed to it. The Lannister agreed. Bolton agreed. We are not asked to do the killing ourselves. We only have to open the doors and play the music, and in exchange we get to be known forever as the house that murdered guests at a wedding, Stevron says. That stops the brother. That is what we get, Stevron continues. His voice does not rise. Along with the gold and the land, we also get the name. Every story any man in the realm tells about the Freys, from now until there are no more Freys. We get the name that goes on the house when a host poisons the sacred compact that allows men to trust each other enough to sit at the same table. He looks at his brother steadily. Bread and salt means something. It means something in the eyes of the old gods and the new, and it means something in the memory of every lord who hears what we did here. He pauses. A lord does not murder guests under his own roof and call himself a lord. No one in the corridor speaks. Stevron looks at each of them in turn, the ones in the room and the ones in the shadow behind. They look back at him. Then, slowly, the doorway empties. Stevron sits alone in his father's solar. Outside, the sky is beginning to pale in the east, the first grey before the dawn, and the river below the window is visible now as a pale line instead of a sound in the dark. He watches it come. He has given away whatever his father promised to Tywin Lannister. The gold, the land, the arrangement, the advantage. He has given all of it away in 2 letters dictated to a tired maester in the middle of the night. What he has kept is the bread and salt. He hears the ravens go a little while later. The sharp wing beats from the rookery in the east tower, the sound of birds released into open air. He does not go to the window. He knows what it looks like. 2 shapes rising above the walls of the twins, climbing against the pale morning sky, turning south along the river toward a camp and a castle that do not yet know what is coming their way. The trap his father built over months of careful correspondence, dismantled in a single hour by a quiet man who only ever wanted to die in his bed. Stevron puts the 3 letters in the candle flame. He watches them burn until there is nothing left, and then he goes to find somewhere to sleep. The Raven arrives at dawn, 2 days after Stevron Frey becomes the Lord of the Crossing. The camp sits in a trampled field outside a village whose name nobody remembered to ask. It is autumn in the Riverlands, and the rains have turned everything to mud, the cook fires making thin grey smoke in the grey morning air, horses and men moving through the mist in the slow, deliberate way of an army that has been at this long enough to know that urgency is for battles, not mornings. Robb Stark is at his maps when his Maester brings the bird in. He is 17, grey-eyed, with his mother's auburn hair and the kind of stillness that months of campaigning have built into him, and he has been awake for hours already, studying the road west where Lannister outriders have been burning villages. He does not look up from the table until the man speaks his name a second time. He takes the letter. The seal is the twin towers of House Frey, the blue and grey bridge between them. He does not recognize the handwriting. He breaks the wax and reads it standing at the table, and by the time he reaches the third line, his eyes have slowed. He reads each word as though he needs to be certain of it. He reads it to the bottom. Then he reads it again. "Bring my mother," he says. Catelyn Stark arrives from her own tent with the look of a woman who has not slept enough, which is the look she has worn for most of the past year. She is auburn-haired and blue-eyed, still carrying herself like a daughter of Riverrun, even here, in a camp full of mud and cold. She reads her son's face before she reads the letter. "Sit down first," she says. "You should read this." She takes the letter from him and reads it standing, the way he did. She reads it slowly, which is not how she reads most things. When she reaches the part about the signal, she stops, and Robb watches something change in her face that is not quite anger and is not quite grief. It is colder than either of those. She was the one who went to the twins. She sat across from Walder Frey and built an alliance where there had been only a wall, word by careful word, her family's honor behind each promise. She gave Robb's name to that house, and they gave their swords, and she believed the arrangement would hold because both sides needed it to hold. That was what she told herself. That was what she still believed until this morning, reading a letter from a dead man's son. She sets the letter down. The man who signed this was Stevron Frey, Robb says, not Walder. Walder is dead. She turns the letter over, then back. His son is warning us. His son fought at Oxcross. I know what his son did. Catelyn is quiet for a moment. She is looking at the letter but not seeing it. Then she says the name like she is placing a stone on a map. Bolton. Yes. The tent is quiet, except for the sounds of the camp outside, men and horses and the smell of the cook fires building. Robb watches his mother's face settle into something very still and very cold. She is not weeping. She does not look as though she is about to weep. She looks like a woman who has just been shown the exact shape of what was being built for her and her son in the dark. Robb has already decided what he wants to do. The question is whether that is the same as what he should do. Bolton's men number nearly 3,000. They hold the left of the northern line, and they are not soft soldiers, and their lord is not a soft commander. If Robb strips him of command on a letter's word or arrests him, those 3,000 men have to make a choice. Some will hold, some will not. The ones who do not hold will ride for home or ride for the Lannisters, and either way, Robb loses them at the worst time to lose anyone. Send for him, Robb says. Not yet. Catelyn takes the camp stool near the table. Tell me what you plan to say first. He tells her. She listens without interrupting, which in his experience means she disagrees with most of it. When he finishes, she says, You are going to show him the letter. He already knows we have it. He knows a raven came from the twins. He does not know what you believe. She looks at him steadily. Do not give him that. Robb summons Rose Bolton in the mid-morning. The man arrives in clean clothes. He is always like this in camp, always immaculate in a way most men stop bothering with after the first month of campaign. He is soft-voiced and pale-eyed, with an unhurried bearing that Robb has always found difficult to read, as though nothing in the world could surprise him enough to make him move faster. He sits in the chair across the camp table from Robb and waits, hands folded, looking like a man who has been called to a meeting he was already expecting. Robb slides the letter across the table without speaking. Bolton reads it. He reads it the way a man reads something he has seen in some form before, taking his time, his expression showing nothing. When he finishes, he sets it down and looks up. Where did this come from? Stevron Frey, the new lord. Bolton examines the seal. And you believe it? Should I not? Bolton considers this for a moment. I think you should consider who benefits from you believing it. His voice stays level throughout, almost gentle. Tywin Lannister has been losing this war in the field. He knows that. A letter like this one, naming a northern lord as a traitor, that causes the king in the north to distrust his own commanders and fracture his army from within, is a kind of battle Tywin Lannister knows how to fight. Stevron Frey is an honorable man. I do not say otherwise. But honorable men can be used. Robb watches him. Bolton holds the gaze, still and calm, giving nothing away. The argument is well made. That is the trouble with it. It is precisely what an innocent man would say, and it is also precisely what a guilty man would prepare to say if he knew this meeting was coming, which Bolton has certainly had time to prepare for. Robb cannot prove, sitting here, which of those things is true. I appreciate you coming, Robb says. You may go. Bolton looks at him for a moment. Then he rises, nods once, and goes. Robb sits alone in the tent. Outside, without announcement, his cavalry commander takes over the duties Bolton had been holding by the time the midday meal is done. The change is noted in the muster rolls. No reason is given. Bolton's men do not react because there is nothing yet, in written words, to react to. That evening Catelyn comes back. He denied it, Robb says. Of course he did. She takes the stool by the table. Do you believe him? Robb thinks about his father. He thinks about the man Eddard Stark was, the man who believed that honor was its own protection, that doing the honest thing and saying the true thing would shield a person from the consequences of other men's dishonesty. He thinks about the Sept of Baelor and what happened there, and about the year of this war that Ned's death made necessary, and about what kind of king shows a man evidence of his treachery and takes the man's word that it is fabricated. No, he says. Good. Catelyn looks at him across the table. Then keep him close, strip away the tools he needs before he can use them, and wait until he gives you something you can act on. Evidence you can show a room full of lords, not just a letter. She pauses. Your father would have confronted him in front of the whole army that same morning. Robb says nothing to that. You are not your father, she says quietly. In this, I am glad. She leaves him to the maps and the letter. Robb stands at the camp table for a while, in the grey afternoon light, looking at the twin towers on the broken seal, and then he puts the letter away and turns back to the campaign, because the war is still going, and winning it is the only answer to any of this that will mean anything in the end. Stevron Frey comes to River Run by barge. He could have come on horseback. He has the horses for it. But the Oxcross wound has complicated riding for the past months, and the barge is quieter, and Stevron has stopped pretending to be in less pain than he is. The craft moves down the green fork in the grey autumn morning, 6 Frey oarsmen at their stations, and a banner flying at the stern, the twin towers of the crossing on its grey and blue field. Behind the barge, along the western bank, 24 Frey knights ride at an easy pace, armour glinting in what little light the overcast sky provides. It is a small honour guard by any standard, but it is enough to make clear that the Lord of the Twins has come in person, and that he has not come alone. River Run appears around a long bend in the river, and Stevron studies it from the bow. He has been here twice before, once in his father's time, and once in his own, and he has always found it striking. A triangular castle at the place where 3 rivers meet, red stone walls lifting directly from the water, a moat that can be flooded on command to turn the whole thing into an island, a castle built to hold, and it has held, and the northern army encamped around its outer walls is only the latest reason why that matters. Catelyn Stark is waiting at the bank when the barge touches it. She is alone, without ceremony, which tells Stevron something about the tenor of this meeting. She is in her middle 30s, auburn-haired and blue-eyed, composed with the particular steadiness of a woman for whom composure is a choice made fresh each morning, rather than something that comes easily. She watches him come carefully down the gangplank and waits until he is on solid ground. "Lord Stevron," she says. "My lady." He looks at her, and she looks at him, and there is a great deal in the space between them that neither says, because neither of them has found the right words for it, and perhaps there are none. After a moment, "I did not apologize in the letters." "There are no right words for it," Catelyn says. "I am aware of that. I thought as much." She leads him through the gate and into the castle yard, where the northern lords who are not in the field have gathered in quiet clusters to see what a fray looks like when he comes under a banner of alliance. Stevron walks through them without hurrying, which is the only pace available to him these days, and he meets their watching faces with the patience of a man who knows he has done nothing that requires apology to any of them. The yard is full of the smell of horses and cook fires, and the castle hall is warm after the cold of the river. Stevron rests a hand on the wall at one point, briefly, and Catelyn pretends not to notice. She is accustomed to managing the dignity of difficult men. Robb Stark meets them in a room off the Great Hall. The king is younger than Stevron was prepared for, which is foolish because he knew the boy's age. He is 17, grey-eyed and auburn-haired, sitting very still in the way that young commanders learn when they are trying to appear older than they are. He has not entirely achieved it, but he rises when Stevron enters, which Stevron did not expect and appreciates. They sit across a table. Catelyn takes a chair to one side and does not speak. "The Frey who agreed to the plan is dead," Stevron says. He does not waste time on approach. "The Frey who warned you of it is sitting across this table. I cannot undo what my father agreed to, and I will not pretend otherwise. What I can give you is what the Frey crossing was always supposed to provide. The ford stays open, the men stay in the field, and the marriage pact your mother made with my father stands, if you will have it." Robb watches him. "Why are you here doing this instead of holding the twins and waiting to see how it falls?" Stevron considers him. "Because I rode at Oxcross," he says, "and because I am not my father." There is a pause. Robb looks at him for a long moment, something working in the grey eyes. Then he glances at Catelyn, and Catelyn says quietly, "The Pact." "Yes," Robb says. "Show me the girl." They bring her in. She is Stevron's granddaughter, dark-haired and clear-eyed, somewhere near 20 years old, with the composed bearing of a person who has been told what is required of her, and has determined she is capable of it. She is not what the bards mean when they use the word beautiful, and she knows this about herself, and she has the kind of self-possession that will prove worth more in a king's court than beauty would have been. She stands at the edge of the room and meets the king's gaze without flinching. Stevron watches Robb look at her with the careful blankness of a young man working very hard not to give anything away. "My lady," Robb says. She inclines her head. "My Lord King." That is all for now. It is enough. The wedding takes place in River Run Sept on the 3rd morning, before the old gods and the new, with the lords of the northern army and the Frey honor guard standing as witness. The Septon who speaks the words is an old man who has served River Run for many years, white-haired and precise, reading from a small leather book with the practiced steadiness of someone who has performed this office in difficult circumstances before, and knows how to hold to the form of the thing, even when the ceremony beneath it is complicated. It is not a long service. There is no wedding feast. That absence is noted by everyone in the room and said aloud by no one. After the week they have all lived through, the deliberate choice to hold a ceremony with no tables set, no bread carried in on trays, no hospitality bond of any kind, is the most eloquent statement anyone could make. There are only the words and the septon, and two people standing side by side before witnesses, and the quiet weight of what they are agreeing to. Robb Stark and his Frey wife exchange their vows in front of 40 men. When it is done, the septon closes his book, and the thing is made. In the courtyard afterward, the Frey knights raise a shout, and the northern lords add their voices until the grey sky above the castle is briefly full of sound. Robb nods at the celebration with the distant courtesy of a man who understands why it is happening, even if he cannot entirely feel it today. His wife stands beside him, her hand through his arm, looking at the assembled men with the same clear steadiness she had in the room. Catelyn watches all of this from the gallery above the yard. She watches her son stand with a stranger he married 3 hours ago, and she watches the Frey knights cheering for a king they were nearly instruments of murdering, and after a while she goes back inside because the cold is too much. That afternoon, the Maester who travelled down from the twins with Stevron finds him in the quiet room near the guest quarters. Stevron has been expecting this conversation in a general way for several weeks. The pain in his right side has changed in the past month. Not better. Not the ordinary discomfort of a wound healing slowly. Different in quality, a thing he has learned to recognize in 60-odd years of paying attention to his own body. The Maester examines him carefully, asks his questions, and then looks at Stevron with the expression of a man sorting through words for the gentlest arrangement of them. "How long?" Stevron says, to spare him the trouble. "Weeks, my lord. Perhaps a month. The wound has opened again at the root. There is nothing more that can be done for it. I am sorry." Stevron sits with that for a moment. The window of the room looks out over the river, the same water he came in on this morning, moving past the red stone walls the same way it has moved past them for 600 years. He thinks about the men in the field, 3,000 Frey swords now committed to a cause they were nearly the instrument of betraying. He thinks about his bed at the twins, the good mattress, the window that faces east toward the water. "Thank you," he says. He means it. He picks up his cane and stands. "I should like to rest now." He does not tell Robb. He does not tell Catelyn. He does not tell his granddaughter, who has just made a life-altering arrangement largely on his behalf and deserves to know, and for whom he will find the words when the time is right. The thing he came here to do is done. The ravens flew. The compact is made. The crossing is open. He walks slowly to his room and closes the door and sits in the chair by the window and rests. The barge carries him back along the same river, past the same grey herons standing in the reed shallows, the same fishermen mending their nets at the water's edge in the early cold. Stevron watches them from the stern and thinks about how little the world changes when large things happen. A man dies. A compact is made. Ravens fly. And still, the herons stand. He is tired in the way that goes beyond sleep. It lives in the bones, this tiredness, in the old wound at his side that pulls tighter when the weather turns damp. The Maester at River Run looked at it again before he departed, and said nothing that a Maester says when things are going well. He said, "Rest, my lord." He said, "Avoid the cold." Stevron thanked him and went to bed an hour earlier than usual, and lay in the dark, listening to the tumblestone move against its banks, and thought about his father. Walder Frey had never once been tired. That was the strange thing. Even at 90, even with gout eating his toes and a cough that lives in his chest through every winter, he had been alert, restless, acquisitive. He wanted things. That was the word for it. He wanted things with a ferocity that never diminished. Wealth, deference, revenge for every slight, real and invented, accumulated over decades of being dismissed as a petty lord who charges a coin to cross a river. Stevron never wanted like that. He observed it in his father and recognized it as a kind of fuel, dirty burning but potent, and understood that he did not possess it. He wants quiet. He wants the accounts to balance. He wants his children well settled and his tenants fed through winter, and the crossing maintained so that travelers can cross without fear of drowning. These are small wants. His father called him a disappointment for 30 years on the strength of them. The barge moves north. The river changes color as the sky changes, from pewter to the deep green-gray of afternoon, and Stevron sits and watches it and doesn't read the dispatches his steward pressed upon him at departure. There will be time for dispatches. There is always time for dispatches. What there is less time for, he suspects, is this: sitting still and feeling the river move beneath him, and knowing that the thing he did in his father's study, the burning of 3 letters, has altered something that cannot be altered back. He does not think of it as bravery. He is not sure it is even principle precisely. It is more like recognition. He saw what the letters contained, and he saw what he himself was, and he understood that one could not coexist with the other. A man who orders hospitality and murder at the same time is not a man he knows how to be. So he burned the letters. It is almost simple when he thinks of it that way. What is not simple is Tywin Lannister. He thinks about Tywin as the afternoon deepens and the first lights of fishing villages appear along the bank. He met Tywin twice. Once at Harrenhal, during the Great Tourney, when Stevron was a young man of 40, and Tywin had already been old in the way powerful men are old, hardened rather than softened by time. And once after, at court, briefly, during a royal progress. Both times Tywin looked at him, the way Tywin looks at everyone who is not immediately useful, with a kind of measuring patience, as though calculating when they might become relevant. He will be relevant now. That is certain. The letters he burned had been agreements. Tywin does not forget broken agreements. Whether Stevron's refusal to participate counts, in Tywin's accounting, as a broken agreement or merely a failure to confirm one, that distinction will matter. He will need to think carefully about what he sends west. He will need to think even more carefully about what he does not send. The barge rounds a long bend, and the twins appear in the failing light. 2 grey towers standing on either bank, the bridge between them, the water moving fast below. Stevron looks at it for a long moment without moving. His home, his father's home. The crossing his family has held for 600 years, through wars and floods and fires and all the patient accumulation of Frey resentment. It looks the same. It always looks the same. That is perhaps the point. He stands with some difficulty and accepts the arm his steward offers without comment. The wound pulls. The cold bites at his fingers. He steps from the barge onto his own dock, on his own land, and stands still for a moment, with the river smell in his nose and the bridge above him, and allows himself one brief, private thought before the household comes to receive him. He thinks, well, you have done it. Whatever comes next, you have done it. Then he goes inside. The great hall of the twins is warm with fires banked high against the autumn chill, and it smells of dogs and rushes and the particular staleness of a room that has housed too many Freys for too many generations. Stevron eats his supper alone, as he has always preferred, and reviews the dispatches afterward with Maester Willem, who is young enough to be earnest about things, and old enough to know which things matter. There is nothing yet from King's Landing. He did not expect anything from King's Landing. He sent no letter west, and so there is nothing to reply to. There is a letter from one of his sons, Rhaegar II, who wrote to express his condolences on their father's death and to ask, with a subtlety that is not subtle, whether the inheritance arrangements remain as previously understood. Stevron sets it aside. There will be time for Rhaegar. There is a letter from a Frey cousin at Sigard expressing shock at the old lord's passing and offering support, by which he means asking for something. Stevron sets it aside as well. There is, finally, a letter bearing a dire wolf seal that arrived 2 days before his return. He breaks it and reads it in the firelight, Maester Willem watching his face with professional discretion. It is from Robb Stark. Brief, formal. It thanks him for the notice of Lord Walder's death and for the confirmation of safe crossing. It acknowledges that the arrangement with Riverrun has been conveyed. It says that he will send an advance party to the crossing within the fortnight to begin discussions regarding the passage of his host. At the bottom, in a hand with a different pressure than the rest, a single line. My mother speaks well of your father's passing, which means nothing and everything, which means Catelyn Tully told her son what she saw at Riverrun, which was a man who chose differently than his father would have chosen, and Robb Stark is, in his cautious young way, acknowledging it. Stevron folds the letter. He sets it beside the candle, not in the fire. The king's advance party, he says to Maester Willem. We will need to prepare the east tower, clean quarters, appropriate provisions, nothing showy. Lord Stark will not send men who expect to be impressed. Of course, my lord. And send to the kitchens. I want the hall prepared for a feast before the month's end. He pauses. A proper one, the kind my father never gave. Maester Willem makes a note and says nothing about the kind of feast his father gave, which is the response Stevron counted on. He sits alone after the Maester leaves, the fire settling into itself beside him. Outside, the river moves, the crossing holds. He is 63 years old, and he is lord of this house, and the thing he set in motion is moving now like the river, without asking his permission, without waiting for him to be ready. He banks the fire himself before bed. Small economies. His father always left that to servants. He stands a moment in the near dark, watching the embers breathe. Then he takes his candle and goes to bed, and lies with his eyes open, and listens to the twins settle around him, the old stone making its nighttime sounds, contracting in the cold, and thinks about Roslyn. She is 17. He saw her last at the family gathering 2 winters past, a quiet girl who reads more than is fashionable, and who watches rooms with the kind of attention that usually indicates either intelligence or unhappiness, and perhaps both. She has her mother's grey eyes and her grandmother's posture, straight-backed and composed, and she looked at him when he mentioned that he might have a use for her in the coming months, with an expression he recognized. Not fear, exactly, but the particular careful blankness that a Frey woman learns early and keeps. He told her, as plainly as he knew how, that the match would not be unkind, that Edmure Tully is not a complicated man, that Riverrun is a good house, well placed, and she will be its lady and not its prisoner. She said, "Yes, grandfather." And then, after a beat, "Is he brave?" He considered the question seriously. Edmure Tully rode out against Tywin's forces when no one expected him to, plugged the fords with his own knights, and did it badly but without hesitation. He said, in his way. She nodded and asked nothing more. He hopes she is at peace with it. He suspects she is not, but that she is capable of making a peace with it that will hold. That is, in the end, all any of them manage. He closes his eyes. The river moves. He sleeps. Rain comes in the night, and by morning has settled into a steady grey presence over the crossing, erasing the far bank and turning the river the colour of old iron. Stevron stands at the window of his study and watches it fall. He thinks that the country is not at its most welcoming when it receives visitors, but that visitors from the north will not be surprised by rain. They come before midday, 7 riders in grey cloaks, with the dire wolf on their surcoats, their horses mud-dark to the knee, and their faces careful and closed in the way soldiers' faces are careful and closed when they have been fighting long enough to stop expecting welcome. The man at their head is not young, perhaps 50, with a grey-shot beard and the kind of quiet that comes from rank rather than temperament. He dismounts in the courtyard without ceremony and looks up at the twins with an expression that reveals nothing at all. His name is Galbart Glover. Stevron knows him distantly, a lord of Deepwood Mott, one of Robb Stark's senior bannermen, a man whose house has suffered losses in this war and who has remained loyal through worse. He is not a man who will be easily impressed or easily reassured. He is, in other words, exactly the right man to send. Stevron receives him in the great hall rather than the solar. It is a calculation. The hall is warmer and larger, and it says something to a northern lord to be received as a guest in the room where feasts are held, rather than as a petitioner in a private office. He offers Glover wine and a seat close enough to the fire that he can dry his boots, and Glover accepts all of it without undue gratitude, and looks around the hall with the measured attention of a soldier assessing a position. "My Lord of Frey," he says, "I thank you for receiving us." "You've ridden in the rain," Stevron says. "The least I can do is provide a fire." They are quiet for a moment. Stevron has learned, over 63 years, that silence is rarely as uncomfortable as the people inside it believe, and that the first man to speak into silence is usually at a disadvantage. He waits. Glover sets down his cup. "The king wishes to understand the terms." "The terms are what Lord Stark was sent by Raven and what was confirmed at River Run. Free passage of his host across the Green Fork. Frey soldiers and knights to join his force on the eastern bank, 4,000 men at arms, provisions for the crossing, no toll. And in return, the wedding. Roslyn Frey to Edmure Tully, at the Twins, on a date agreed before the month's end. A compact between our houses, sealed in the proper way." Stevron pauses, and acknowledgement, in whatever form Lord Stark sees fit, that the Freys are loyal bannermen of the Trident. "Not of the crown?" Glover says carefully. "Of the Trident," Stevron says, equally carefully. "I am a vassal of River Run. River Run serves the king in the north and of the Trident. The chain is what it is." Glover looks at him for a long moment. His eyes are grey and steady and give nothing away. "You understand, my lord, that this offer arrives late, that there are those in the king's camp who remember the old lord's delays." "My father's delays," Stevron says. "Yes. And the king married elsewhere, without benefit of the original compact." "The original compact named a Frey daughter without specifying which one. The arrangement I made at River Run names Lady Roslyn as bride to Lord Edmure Tully. These are not the same compact." He says it without heat, as a man states a thing he has already thought through completely. If Lord Stark's counsellors wish to argue the point, I will argue it at length. But I suspect we both have better uses for our time. Something shifts in Glover's face. Not quite a smile, but the shape beneath a smile. He reaches for his wine and drinks. "The king will want to come himself," he says, "to see the crossing. He is welcome. He will bring his queen. She is welcome as well. Some among his bannermen are not easily satisfied," Glover says. "You understand that trust is not a thing that comes back easily after certain disappointments." "I understand that trust is built by actions," Stevron says. "I have taken actions. I intend to take more. Lord Stark is welcome to watch me take them and judge accordingly." The fire settles. Rain moves against the high windows of the hall, steady and without urgency. Glover is quiet for a moment, and Stevron can see him deciding something, and then he gives a small nod, the kind that is not agreement so much as provisional acceptance. "He'll come within the fortnight," Glover says, "with 200 horse as escort. His main force will follow. We will be ready." And Lady Roslin is at the Twins, Stevron says. She arrived 3 days ago. She is well. This seems to settle something in Glover, though he says nothing further about it. They speak for another hour about logistics, the capacity of the bridge, the order of march, the provisioning stations that will need to be established on both banks, and it is, Stevron notes, the conversation of men who intend a thing to happen rather than men who are still deciding whether it should. When Glover goes to see to his horses and his men, Stevron sits alone for a while with the fire and the rain. The wound at his side has been making itself known since mid-morning, and he shifts in his chair and breathes until it settles. Then he calls for a servant and asks to be shown to the West Tower. He had arranged modest rooms for Roslin there, away from the noisier clusters of Frey relations who descended on the twins after his father's death. There are a great many Freys. They smell inheritance with the particular eagerness of large families, and they have been eating his provisions and making their assessments and offering their condolences in the particular way Freys offer condolences, which is to say, while calculating what the condolences might earn them. Stevron has received them all and answered none of their real questions and directed them back to their rooms, and the West Tower is as far from most of them as the castle allows. Roslin is sitting by the window when he enters. She has a book open in her lap and is not reading it. She is watching the rain fall on the river. She stands when she hears him, with the straight-backed posture of a Frey woman who was taught young to stand when her lord enters a room, and he waves her back down and pulls a chair close. "How are you finding it?" he asks. "Cousin Merritt is loud," she says, "but the rooms are warm and the view is the river, which is better than I expected." He looks at her. She is still the girl he remembers from 2 winters past, the one who watched rooms rather than performing for them, but there is something steadier in her face now, something that has decided. He does not know when that happened or what it cost her. "Are you frightened?" he asks. She considers the question honestly, which he had not fully expected. "A little," she says. "Not of him specifically, of whether I will know how to be what is needed. No one knows that in advance," he says. "You learn it after." She looks at him with those grey eyes. "Did you?" He thinks of his wife, dead these 12 years. He thinks of how long it took him to understand that what she needed from him was simply to be heard, and how late he understood it, and how he cannot give her that understanding back. "Eventually," he says. She nods and looks back at the window. The rain runs down the glass in crooked lines. The river below it is swollen with the autumn rains, moving fast and brown and full of the sound of somewhere far away. "Lord Glover has arrived," Stevron says. "The king will come within the fortnight. I know. Maester Willem told me." She is quiet for a moment. "Is there anything you need from me before he comes?" "Only to continue as you are," he says. "Composed, present. You do not need to perform anything for Lord Stark. He is not a man who is impressed by performance." What is he impressed by? Stevron considers this. He has read Robb Stark's letters, and the accounts of his battles, and the reports that came north through the various channels he has maintained since his father died. He has formed a picture of the boy king, and the picture is of a young man who wins on the battlefield and loses in the antechambers, who is brave in exactly the ways his father was brave, and therefore in exactly the ways his father was vulnerable, who is being slowly taught by the war that honor and victory are not the same thing, and who is learning it faster than most would. Honesty, Stevron says finally. I believe he is impressed by honesty. She nods again, as though filing this away. Then she says, Grandfather, what you did. With my grandfather's letters. She hesitates. I heard that there were letters. From the Lannisters. And that you burned them. He looks at her. He has not spoken of this to anyone except Maester Willem, and then only in the most oblique terms. He wonders who told her, and decides that it does not matter very much. The twins have always been full of ears. "Who told you?" he asks. "Cousin Kyra. She heard it from one of the stewards." He absorbs this. "And what do you think," he says, "of what I did?" She is quiet for a moment. The rain comes down. The river moves. "I think," she says slowly, "that it was the only thing worth doing. And I think it must have been hard." She pauses, not because it was difficult to decide, but because it could not be undone. He looks at her for a long moment. She has understood something, he thinks, that took him most of a life to understand. That the weight of irreversibility is not in the decision, but in the moment after, when the thing is done and the world has accepted it, and there is nowhere to go but forward. "Yes," he says. "That is exactly right." He stays a while longer. They do not speak very much. The rain comes down outside the window, and the river moves below, and somewhere in the castle a door opens and closes, and a Frey voice rises briefly, and is answered by another, and then goes quiet, and they sit in the west tower in the particular peace of two people who have both decided something and are resting before what comes next. When he leaves, he goes slowly. The wound is quieter now in the cold air of the corridor. He walks back through the twins toward his study, past the portraits of Freys going back 3 generations, past the servants moving quietly with their purposes, past the windows where the rain is still coming down over the crossing, and the bridge holds, as it has always held, patient and grey above the moving water. He thinks about what she said, that it could not be undone. He thinks about Tywin Lannister, who will also know by now that something has been done that cannot be undone. He thinks about what Tywin will do with that knowledge, and he thinks it will not be nothing. He sits at his desk and pulls the accounts toward him and begins to read. Because the accounts do not wait for wars or inheritance or the adjustments of powerful men, and because there is comfort, at 63, in the things that do not wait. The morning the king comes, the clouds break for the first time in a week. Cold light falls flat and low across the western bank, turning the mud silver where it catches and leaving the rest in shadow, and Stevron stands on the gatehouse parapet and watches the column come out of the tree line. 200 horse, riding in good order, grey cloaks and dire wolf banners, and the banners of the houses behind them, Umber and Glover, and others he cannot read at this distance. The young king rides at the head on a grey destrier, broad-shouldered even at this range, moving with the easy authority of a man who has spent the better part of a year in the saddle. Beside him rides a woman with auburn hair, coppery in the thin light, and Stevron knows before he is close enough to see her face that this is Catelyn Tully. Behind her, on a bay mare, a dark-haired woman he does not recognize, the Volantine, the Queen. He has heard descriptions of her, a healer from across the narrow sea who came south to tend the wounded and stayed because Robb Stark asked her to, which is one version of the story, and which Stevron suspects is the true one because it is the kind of story that does not need embellishment to explain itself. He watches them come and then goes down from the parapet, slowly, with one hand on the wall. He crosses the bridge on foot and waits on the western bank. It is the right gesture. A lord does not send men to receive a king. A lord goes himself. The column slows as it approaches, and Robb Stark rides forward and stops 3 yards away and looks down at him. And Stevron looks up, and they regard each other for the first time. The boy is not quite what he expected. He knew from the reports that Robb Stark was young, 17 or 18, a king in name before he was a man in years. But the reports had not adequately conveyed the weight in his face, the particular kind of steadiness that lives in the grey eyes. The same grey as his mother's eyes are blue, which is to say the colour of a house that has held the same ground for a long time. He looks like Ned Stark. Stevron had known Ned Stark at court, briefly, and the resemblance is strong enough to land somewhere in the chest. Robb dismounts without being asked and holds out his hand, and Stevron takes it. "Lord Frey," Robb says, "Your Grace." Stevron inclines his head. He does not kneel. He is 63 years old, and the wound would make it undignified, and he suspects Robb Stark would find it embarrassing in any case. Robb seems to understand this without it being said. He is, Stevron will later think, good at understanding things without them being said, which is a quality that will either make him a great lord or get him killed, depending on whether he is also good at understanding things that are said very quietly and indirectly by men with a great deal of practice at saying them that way. "My mother told me what you chose," Robb says, "at River Run, what you found in my father's letters." Stevron is still for a moment. He had known this was coming, or something like it. He had been preparing in the back of his mind the correct response, the one that neither overstates nor understates what he did, that neither claims credit nor deflects it. But looking at Ned Stark's son, he finds the prepared response inadequate. "I found a plan I could not be part of," he says. "That is all?" Robb looks at him for a moment. Then he nods once, and the subject is closed between them, with the efficiency of men who both understand that words spent on a thing already done are words not spent on what comes next. Catelyn has ridden up beside her son. She looks at Stevron with eyes that are not quite what they were at River Run. Something has shifted in them since then. Some specific weight has been put down, and he thinks she is as close to rested as she has been since this war began. Which is to say, she is not rested, but she is not breaking either. "Lord Frey," she says. "My lady," he says. "Welcome to the twins." He brings them inside. The hall has been prepared well. He had given clear instructions, and Maester Willem had carried them out, and the result is warmth and firelight, and the smell of good food and nothing that could be called lavish, which is the right register for a northern king who has been living in the field and who will be contemptuous of excess and reassured by sufficiency. The Frey household turns out to receive them, though Stevron has arranged for the noisier of his relations to be occupied elsewhere. There are enough Freys that this is always possible. They eat. The dinner is the meeting. Stevron had made this clear to his steward. The food would be good, but the evening would be business, and there would be maps, and anyone who expected a celebration was attending the wrong supper. The northern lords lay out what they need. 4,000 Frey soldiers joining their host means the balance of the southern campaign shifts, means Tywin cannot commit his full force to any single front without leaving another one open, means the Westerlands themselves become accessible in ways they were not a month ago. They speak in the direct language of men who have been at war long enough to stop using polite circumlocutions for death and territory and logistics. Stevron listens more than he speaks, and speaks when the Frey perspective is needed, and finds, to his mild satisfaction, that the northern lords are capable of following an argument to its conclusion and adjusting when the argument is good. Robb Stark is quiet through most of this. He asks questions when something is unclear, and the questions are precise, and he does not ask the same question twice. Stevron watches him and thinks about what the war has made of this boy in a year, and thinks it has made something that his father would have recognized and been proud of, and probably terrified by. After the maps are put away and the wine is poured again, Robb says, "I would like to meet Lady Roslin." "She will be at tomorrow's supper," Stevron says. "I thought it better to give her time." "Is she well?" "She's composed," Stevron says. "She's ready. She's not frightened, or if she is, she keeps it to herself, which amounts to the same thing in a lady of this house." Robb considers this, and she understands what is being asked of her. "She is a Frey woman," Stevron says. They understand that kind of thing earlier than is probably fair. Catelyn looks at him when he says this. Something in her expression shifts, not quite sympathy, something more like recognition. Robb nods and does not press it further. He is, Stevron thinks, a man who knows when he has received the answer he is going to receive, and when pressing will only produce repetition, another quality that could save him or damn him, depending. The supper ends, and the lords disperse to their quarters. Stevron walks with Catelyn briefly in the corridor, the two of them moving at the pace that his wound and her cold courtesy jointly produce, and she says quietly, "You have prepared well." "I have tried to," he says. "He trusts you," she says, "more than he would admit." "He is careful about his trust," Stevron says. "That is wisdom." "It is," she says, "though it did not come easily." She pauses. "He did not sleep for 3 days after your raven arrived, after the first one, from River Run. He did not believe it. And now? Now he believes it enough to be here," she says, which is, Stevron thinks, the most precisely accurate description of working trust that he has ever heard. She goes to her room, and he goes to his solar to sit with the remaining wine and the fire and the sound of the river outside. The twins are quieter than they have been since his father died, the household settling around the presence of the king as households do, the particular hush of a place that knows itself to be observed. The knock comes perhaps an hour later, small and precise. He calls her in. The queen is dark-haired and direct-eyed in the way of people from the far south, from Volantis or the cities near it, where they do not learn the northern habit of looking at the middle distance when they speak to you. She stands in the doorway with a shawl around her shoulders and looks at him without preamble. "I wanted to thank you," she says, "not for myself, for him. He cannot say it here in front of his lords because it would look like a concession. But he feels it." Stevron looks at her for a moment. "He made a brave marriage," he says. "That is not a thing requiring thanks." "He made a foolish marriage by every measure of this country," she says, directly, without self-pity. "He made it anyway, and you made it possible for that choice to survive." She pauses. "You did not have to do that." "I did not do it for the marriage," Stevron says. "I did it because the alternative was a thing I could not be part of." "I know," she says. "That is why I'm thanking you." They regard each other for a moment. He thinks she is remarkable in the particular way of people who have arranged their values in a clear order and are simply acting on that order without drama. He thinks Robb Stark is fortunate, in the way that very few young kings are fortunate, to have beside him someone who tells him true things. She says good night and goes. He sits alone and listens to the river and thinks about tomorrow, when Roslin will sit at the same table as Edmure Tully for the first time, and about what he has set in motion and where it will carry them all, and about the weight of doing something that cannot be undone. It does not frighten him. He is 63 years old and past the age of being frightened by irreversibility. He has simply come to understand it as the nature of meaningful action. You cannot unmake the thing, which is precisely what makes it worth doing. The fire burns down. He banks it himself. He takes his candle and walks to bed through the quiet castle, and the river moves outside, as it always moves, and the bridge holds. The wedding takes place on the 4th day after the king's arrival, in the hour before the light fails, when the sun sits low above the western hills and sends long amber fingers through the sept's high windows. The sept at the twins is not large. Walder Frey was not a devout man, and never spent coin on the gods when he could spend it on himself, and the room shows it. The stone plane, the painted figures of the 7, faded where moisture has worked at them over the years. But Stevron has had it cleaned and hung with blue and silver cloth for the Tully colours, and candles fill every alcove, and in the candlelight the plainness doesn't matter. The light makes something of whatever it touches. Roslin comes in on Stevron's arm. He has given brides away before. He has stood in septs and godswoods and open fields and watched women he is responsible for walk toward men they do not know, and he has felt, each time, the particular sensation of a thing being transferred, a weight passing from one set of hands to another. He expects to feel it now. He does not expect what he actually feels, which is something closer to relief, or maybe the shape relief makes when it is mixed with sorrow. The sensation of a door closing on something that was never quite a threat but was always a possibility. She walks steadily. Her dark hair is dressed with small pearls, river pearls from the Green Fork, and she wears a gown of pale grey that is not quite silver and not quite the ash colour of mourning, something between. She carries herself the way she always carries herself, straight-backed and composed, with that quality of watching that Stevron has come to understand as her primary mode of being in the world. She watches everything. She is watching now. Edmure Tully stands at the altar with the septon. He is broad and auburn-haired, with the Tully look about him, not handsome in any particular way, but with an open face that does not know how to be cruel. He is wearing his best clothes, and they fit him well enough, and he is nervous in the way that large physical men are nervous, which is to say, he holds himself very still to compensate. He watched Roslin at supper the night before. Stevron had arranged for them to be seated near each other, not beside each other, which would have been too pointed, but near enough that the talk could reach across if it chose to. It chose to. Edmure had made her laugh twice. Small laughs, genuine ones, quickly composed. Stevron had noted them the way he noted the accounts, as facts to be filed and drawn on later. The septon speaks the words of the ceremony. The 7 aspects are named and acknowledged. The cloak is exchanged, the Tully trout for the Frey towers, and Roslin becomes Roslin Tully with the particular efficiency of the ceremony, which is to say faster than anyone expected, and with less drama than most hoped for. When Edmure kisses her, he is careful about it, which is either courtesy or very good advice from someone, and either way is the right choice. Robb Stark watches from the right side of the sept, with his queen beside him. His face is still. Stevron, who has been watching him for 4 days now, reads the stillness correctly, the same way he reads Roslin's composure correctly, as the outward form of something considerable happening inside. This wedding costs Robb Stark something. Not the wedding itself, which is between his uncle and a Frey girl, and concerns him only politically. What it costs him is the acknowledgement built into it, the public demonstration that the compact has been honoured, that the Freys of the Crossing are standing with the king in the north. That acknowledgement carries weight in both directions. He cannot take the army across the bridge and then pretend the bridge was free. He is bound now in ways he was not bound before, and he knows it, and his face is still. Catelyn does not have a still face. She stands with her hands folded at her waist, and her eyes are bright, and she is not weeping, and she will not weep, because she is Catelyn Tully, and she does not weep in public. But the brightness is real. Her brother is being married. The compact her son could not fulfill is being fulfilled by another hand. The crossing is open. The Frey banners will ride with the direwolf. These are things she has wanted without allowing herself to want them, because wanting things you cannot control is a kind of vulnerability. She stopped permitting herself at some point in the last year, and seeing them happen anyway produces an emotion for which she does not have a precise name. The feast follows in the great hall. Stevron has ordered the musicians to play river songs and old Tully hymns, the kind of music that fills a room without demanding attention, the kind that lets people speak and laugh and drink without having to compete against it. One of his cousins, Walder Rivers, had proposed the Rains of Castamere earlier in the week, framing it as a compliment to the Lannister connection, by which he meant that he had not understood that the Lannister connection was gone and was not coming back. Stevron had told him gently that the Rains of Castamere was not appropriate for a wedding between the Freys and the Tullys, who are bannermen of the Trident, and that if Walder Rivers could not understand why, Stevron would find other employment for his evening. Walder Rivers had understood. so there is no Rains of Castamere. There is a harper and a fiddler and a piper, and later in the evening, when the wine has been going long enough, 2 of the younger Frey cousins begin to dance and pull others with them, and the hall fills with the kind of noise that Stevron's father always hated, because it meant the attention of the room had moved away from him and toward whatever was happening in front of the fire. Stevron sits at the high table and drinks 1 cup of wine slowly, and watches the room. Edmure dances with his bride. She moves well, follows well, and after the first 2 measures, she stops looking at her feet and looks at him instead, and something shifts in how she holds herself. Something relaxes fractionally, and Stevron files this too in the same column as the 2 small laughs at supper. Progress made. Robb Stark is talking with Galbart Glover at the far end of the high table, bent close over something, their voices low. The Queen sits beside Robb and eats, and watches the dancing with an expression of what appears to be genuine pleasure. She is the only person in the hall, Stevron thinks, who is entirely present in this moment, without any portion of her attention engaged in calculation. It is a remarkable quality in a queen. The feast has been going for perhaps 2 hours when Lord Glover appears at Stevron's elbow. He moves quietly for a man of his size, and he bends close. "A raven has come," Glover says, from the Lannister host, addressed to Lord Stark. Stevron does not look at him. He keeps his eyes on the dancers. What does it say? A proposal of parley. Hostages exchanged in good faith. Terms to be discussed at a neutral location. Stevron is still for a moment. He thinks about Tywin Lannister sitting in his solar at Harrenhal, or wherever he is quartered now, with the news from the crossing on his table and the news of the wedding still coming and adjusting. He thinks about what it costs a man like Tywin to send a parley raven, what it means that he sent it now, before the wedding was confirmed, which means he sent it when he knew the wedding was likely but not yet certain, which means he began adjusting before he had to, which is the mark of a man who does not wait for the blow to land before he starts moving. "Tonight?" Glover asks. "Show it to Lord Stark," Stevron says, "but not yet. Let him have the feast." He pauses. He will not have many more of these. Glover nods and withdraws. Stevron turns back to the hall and watches the dancing and the firelight, and his granddaughter moving in the arms of a man she did not know a week ago, who made her laugh twice, and whose face does not know how to be cruel. He thinks that this is the best outcome available to her in a world that offers women of this house very few outcomes. He thinks that the best outcome available is not the same as a good outcome, but that the distance between the two can be closed over time by people who are willing to do the work of closing it. He takes a second cup of wine. He does not often take a second cup. But the candles are burning, and the music plays, and his granddaughter is dancing, and the thing he set in motion in his father's study on the night his father died has arrived at this moment, and it is not a bad moment. He permits himself the wine. Outside, the river moves under the bridge in the dark, cold and fast and going where it was always going, indifferent to weddings and compacts and the careful arrangements of old men. Stevron drinks and watches and does not think about tomorrow until tomorrow comes for him, which it will, as it always does, without asking whether he is ready. Tywin Lannister reads the report once and sets it down. He does not read it again. He reads everything once and retains it completely, which is a quality he regards as a tool rather than a gift, in the same way he regards all his qualities. The report is from a rider who made good time from a contact near Seaguard, and its contents are brief. The wedding at the Twins has taken place. Roslyn Frey is now Roslyn Tully. The Frey crossing is open. Robb Stark's host will begin moving across the Green Fork within the week. He sets the report on the table beside the candle and looks at the far wall. The solar at Harrenhal is cold in the specific way that Harrenhal is always cold, the stones never having recovered their capacity for warmth after Balerion burned them into their current shapes 3 centuries ago. A fire burns high in the hearth. It makes no impression on the room. He has been quartered here for 2 months, and he has concluded that the fire is largely decorative. He does not complain about the cold. He regards complaining about things one cannot change as a form of weakness he cannot afford to display, particularly in front of men who are already watching him for signs that the position is worse than he represents it. The position is worse than he represents it. He thinks about Stevron Frey. He had assessed Stevron twice, once at Harrenhal, in another life, at the Great Tourney, when Stevron was perhaps 40, and already cautious in the way of men who learned early that caution was the only inheritance their father would ever give them. And once at court, briefly, a man who thanked the servants and arrived precisely on time and offered nothing that had not been asked for. Stevron Frey was a careful man. Careful men were, in Tywin's experience, predictable men, because what careful men were careful about was their own advantage, and their own advantage was a constant that could be calculated and planned against. He had calculated wrong, that was the fact of it, and he sat with it the way he sat with all facts that did not please him, which was directly and without flinching. He had assumed that Stevron Frey would see the arrangement with the same clarity Tywin saw it, which was the clarity of a man who knows which side is winning and attaches himself accordingly. He had not adequately accounted for the possibility that Stevron Frey had his own clarity, arrived at by a different calculation, and that this calculation had produced a different result. He heard a knock and said, "Enter." And Sir Kevan came in wearing the look he always wore when summoned in the night hours, which was not quite resentment and not quite concern, and was, in fact, simply the reliable expression of a man who has served his more powerful brother for 40 years and has accepted that this is what serving him looks like. Kevan sat without being invited, which meant he had already heard. "The report," he said. "Yes. The crossing is gone." "The crossing was never ours," Tywin said. "We were borrowing it." He looked at the candle. "What is gone is the arrangement we were borrowing it through." Kevan was quiet for a moment. He was not the sharpest of the Lannisters, but he was thorough, and thorough men arrived at accurate conclusions even when they arrived slowly. "Bolton," he said. "Bolton is isolated." Tywin had been thinking about Rose Bolton since the first raven from the crossing arrived 3 weeks ago, the one confirming that Stevron Frey had refused to participate. Bolton's role in the arrangement was specific and could not be fulfilled without the Frey element. Without the Freys, Bolton was a man carrying a secret he could not use, surrounded by men whose king he had planned to murder, with no leverage and no protection. It was a bad position. Tywin had no sympathy for this. Bolton had chosen his position, and having chosen it, could live with the consequences or die with them, and either outcome was useful. "He'll do nothing," Tywin said. "He cannot do anything without exposure. A man who cannot move is a man who can be managed later." "Later," Kevan said. "And now?" "Now." Tywin stood and walked to the window. The night outside was cold and dark. The ruin of Harrenhal's west tower open to the sky at the far end of the courtyard, its melted stones pale in the moonlight. He looked at it, as he often looked at it, with the kind of attention he gave to things that instructed him. 3 centuries ago, a dragon lord had made that ruin in an afternoon. The family that built the castle was gone. The family that inherited it after was gone. The one after that was gone. The record of Harrenhal was a record of houses that had overextended, and he had been at this castle for 2 months with a host he could not quite afford to keep in the field indefinitely, and the thought occurred to him, as it had before, that he should take instruction. "Now we assess what can be salvaged," he said. "Robb Stark has the crossing, 4,000 Frey soldiers, and the initiative. He is 16 or 17 years old. He wins every battle he fights, and he cannot hold a kingdom." He let that last point settle before continuing. The north is too far, too cold, too thin. He has no fleet. He cannot hold the riverlands against the full weight of the south indefinitely, regardless of how many Freys he has. His bannermen are loyal. His bannermen are loyal while he wins, Tywin said. That is not the same thing. Kevan looked at him. The parley, Tywin said. He had sent the raven 6 days ago, before he had confirmation of the wedding, when he had confirmation only of the negotiation and wanted to move while the outcome was still uncertain. This was correct. You did not wait for the blow to land before you adjusted. He will receive it at the feast or after. He will show it to his mother. She will tell him to attend. She might tell him it is a trap. It is not a trap. There is no trap here. Tywin turned from the window. What I can offer him is a settlement that costs him less than continued war, and costs me less than continued war. That is the whole of it. Whether he accepts it depends on whether he is still fighting for his father, or whether he has begun to fight for the north. He paused. His mother knows the difference. She has been trying to teach him for a year. What are the terms? Tywin had been assembling the terms in his mind since the first report from the crossing. He went through them now for Kevan, precisely and without decoration. The North would govern itself. Robb Stark would be confirmed as Warden of the North, a hereditary title, unambiguous. His own laws, his own garrison, fealty to the crown in matters of foreign arrangement only, no Lannister swords quartered in northern castles, no royal oversight of northern taxation. In exchange, the king's peace, the withdrawal of the northern host to north of the Neck, and the formal acknowledgement that Joffrey sat the Iron Throne. Kevan was quiet for a moment. He will want his sister. He will ask for her, Tywin said. He may have her. She is a hostage without further strategic value at this point. This was true. Sansa Stark was useful only as leverage over Robb, and leverage over Robb was no longer the primary problem. The primary problem was getting Robb's army out of the Riverlands before it could be used as the foundation for something larger, something that combined the northern host and Frey swords and Tully forces into a single engine that could reach Casterly Rock or King's Landing or both. She can go north with him. Joffrey will object. Joffrey, Tywin said, in the tone he used for statements he did not intend to discuss further, will do what he is told. Kevan nodded. He had long since reached a working peace with this aspect of his brother's governance. His father, Kevan said, more quietly. Ned Stark. Tywin was still for a moment. He thought about Ned Stark, whose head had come off at Joffrey's order on the steps of the Great Sept, and whose ghost had been driving this war ever since. He thought about that decision the way he thought about all decisions that produced consequences he had not adequately anticipated, with precise and unsparing attention. It was a mistake, not a moral error. He did not spend time on moral errors, but a strategic one. You did not make martyrs of honorable men. You imprisoned them, negotiated with them, used them. You did not give the North a dead hero to avenge. His name can be cleared, he said. Posthumously, a royal declaration of misadventure, a King's Guard error in translation of the order. He said it without inflection. There are forms for this. Robb Stark won't believe it. He doesn't need to believe it, Tywin said. He needs to be able to tell his bannermen that the crown acknowledged the wrong. That is not belief. That is politics. Kevan said nothing further. They understood each other, as they always understood each other, with the efficiency of men who had been conducting this kind of conversation for 4 decades and had stopped needing the intermediate steps. After Kevan left, Tywin sat at the table and pulled parchment toward him and wrote to Cersei. The letter was brief and said nothing that could be used against him if intercepted. It said that the situation in the Riverlands was evolving, that certain earlier arrangements had concluded, and that she should expect a change of approach in the weeks ahead. He sealed it and set it with the correspondence to be carried south in the morning. Then he sat alone in the cold solar with the dying candle, and thought about Walder Frey, who was 63 years old and wounded from a battle at Oxcross, and had been his father's disappointment for 30 years, and who had looked at 3 letters laying out a clean and profitable arrangement, and had burned them. He did not understand it. He was not certain he was meant to. There were, in his experience, a small number of men who operated outside the calculus he had mastered, not because they were irrational, but because their calculation incorporated variables he did not weight as variables. Ned Stark had been such a man. It had made Ned Stark predictable in a different way. Predictable as a stone is predictable, which is to say, you could always depend on it to remain where it was, and this was useful until the stone was in a position where remaining in place was not the outcome you wanted. He put out the candle and went to bed in the cold dark, and thought about the parley, and about what Robb Stark would look like sitting across a table, and about whether the boy had grown into the thing he needed him to be for the settlement to hold. He supposed he would find out. The host crosses in 3 days. Stevron watches from a chair on the central span of the bridge, which is not dignified, but is the compromise the wound and the maester jointly impose on him. The chair has been brought from the hall, carried by 2 servants who did it without comment, because lords at the Twins do strange things, and it is not a servant's place to remark on them. He sits and watches the columns come and go beneath him, and the river runs below, and the noise of an army crossing water is different from any other noise an army makes. It is quieter. The sound of the current below seems to absorb it, and the men seem to understand this without being told, and they cross in the particular hush of soldiers who have been in the field long enough to know that noise is something you spend rather than waste. The wagons creak, the horses move in steady rhythm, the banners hang slack in the cold air, the grey wolf, the Frey towers, the Tully trout on its field of blue and red, all of them going east together, toward whatever the east holds. He counts them as they pass. He cannot help it. He is 63 years old, and he has been keeping accounts of things his entire life, and an army crossing his bridge is a thing that wants to be counted. By the afternoon of the 2nd day, he has an estimate he is comfortable with. Something between 14 and 16,000 effective, accounting for the 4,000 Frey soldiers now incorporated into the column's eastern half. It is the largest force that has crossed this bridge in his lifetime, possibly in his father's lifetime as well. Robb Stark crosses on the morning of the 2nd day. He comes with a close guard, and his queen and Lord Glover, and he stops at the midpoint of the bridge, where Stevron is sitting, and looks out at the river for a long moment without speaking. "It moves fast," Robb says. "Always. Faster than it looks from shore." Stevron shifts in the chair. The cold is in everything today, in the stone of the parapet, and the iron of the chair, and the air coming off the water. "Your father crossed here more than once. He always stopped at the middle." Robb looks at him. "He liked bridges?" "He liked to see both banks at the same time, I think, to know exactly where he was." He pauses. Most men prefer one side or the other. Robb is quiet for a moment. He looks east at the soldiers moving off the bridge onto the far bank, the column spreading and reforming with the practiced ease of men who have done this before. Then he says, "I've been thinking about the parley. I expected you had. My mother wants me to go." He does not say what he himself wants, which is characteristic of him in Stevron's observation. He reports information and waits. "Your mother is right," Stevron says. "Refusing the parley says you are afraid of what he will offer. A man who is winning does not refuse to hear terms. And if the terms are a trap. A parley is not a battle," Stevron says. "The conventions are old, and Tywin Lannister observes them. Not because he has principles, but because violating parley conventions makes every future parley impossible, and he will need future parleys." He looks out at the river. What he offers will not be what it appears to be on its face, but there is useful information in what a man is willing to appear to offer. Even a false proposal has a shape. The shape tells you what he thinks you need, and what he thinks he can withhold. Robb considers this. He does it with his eyes on the water, and his expression still, and Stevron lets him do it without filling the silence, which is, in his experience, the correct way to let a young man think. "He offered my sister," Robb says, finally. "Yes. Sansa." He says her name, as though placing it carefully. He didn't have to include that. "No," Stevron agrees. "He did not. Which means he thinks it matters to me more than it costs him. Which means," Stevron says, "that he has decided she is no longer useful to him as leverage. Which tells you something about where he thinks the weight of the situation lies." He pauses. "Or it means he knows it matters to you, and he is including it to make the rest of the package more difficult to refuse. Both things can be true at the same time." Robb is quiet again. Below them, a company of Frey cavalry crosses in close order, 20 abreast, the horses calm and the riders straight and looking ahead. 4,000 of them, or near enough. A number Stevron is familiar with because he raised and equipped them and knows what they cost. "Will you come?" Robb says. "To the parley, if I go." Stevron looks at him. He had expected the question, and had been examining his answer to it for several days without arriving at one he was fully satisfied with. He is 63 years old and wounded, and the road south to wherever Tywin chooses to meet them is not a road that will be comfortable. He is also the man who made the choice that created the necessity for the parley, which means he has a responsibility to it that is difficult to argue away. "Yes," he says. "I will come." Robb nods once, and the thing is settled, and they stand and sit together for a while in the cold morning air, watching the army cross, and do not speak further, and the river moves below them, indifferent and fast. The crossing finishes on the evening of the third day. The last wagon comes off the western bank at dusk, and the Frey guards close the gate not against anyone, but as a formality, the marking of a completed action. Stevron watches from the same parapet he watched from on the first day, and then goes inside. Roslin had come to him that morning. She and Edmure were to depart for River Run the following day, once the road south was confirmed clear, and she had knocked on the solar door in the early hours, with the quiet knock he had come to recognize as hers. He had told her she did not need to say farewell. She had said that she knew she did not need to, and that she was doing it anyway. She sat with him for a while. She had questions about River Run, practical questions, about the household and the Meister and the layout of the castle, the kind of questions a woman asks when she is preparing to manage something new and wants to be competent from the first day. He answered them as fully as he could, and where he did not know the answer, he said so, and she filed everything away with the precision he had come to associate with her. Before she left, she said, "He is kind, grandfather. I want you to know that." He had not been sure what to say to this. He said, "I am glad." "I think he will try," she said, "to be a good husband. He does not know yet how, but he will try, and I think that is most of what you can ask of anyone at the start." He had thought of his own wife again, and of how long it took him to understand what trying looked like in practice, and of the specific cost of learning it late. "It is," he said, "and you will teach him the rest." She had looked at him with those grey eyes and said, "Come to River Run when the war is over." Then she left, which was the right moment to leave, and he had sat alone for a while, with the morning light coming through the window and the river outside, and the particular feeling of a thing completed that is also a thing begun. Now the crossing is done, and the castle is quieter than it has been in weeks. The Frey cousins have mostly departed, their assessments made, and their condolences delivered, and their provisions consumed, and what remains is the household, the bridge, the river, and the accounts. He sits at the desk and opens the account books and begins to read, because the accounts do not pause for weddings or crossings or the adjustments of history, and because the numbers are a kind of anchor. They have been his anchor for 40 years, the thing that was always manageable, regardless of what else was not. He finds the same comfort in them that some men find in prayer, which is the comfort of a known practice producing a known result. He thinks, as he reads, about Rose Bolton. Bolton has not written. This is not surprising. A man who was party to a plan that has now failed in the company of men who are unaware that the plan existed does not write. He keeps still and waits to see whether the silence will be enough. It is a reasonable strategy. It may even work. Bolton is a careful man in the way that men with specific and shameful things to hide are careful, which is to say very carefully indeed. But Stevron has his own sources in the northern host, men and women who carry information in the ordinary course of things, stewards and drovers and camp followers who move between lords' households with the invisibility of the necessary. He knows more about the mood of the host than Robb knows he knows, and what those sources tell him is that Bolton speaks little and watches much, and has lately been riding at the rear of columns rather than the van, which is the position of a man who is not sure what is coming from the front. Something will come from the front, the parley, and then whatever follows the parley, and then the long settling that follows everything, if it comes to that. Stevron closes the account book and leans back in his chair, and thinks that he has done what he can from the crossing, that the board has been reset as thoroughly as he could reset it, and that what happens now is beyond his weight to determine alone. The river moves outside. The bridge holds. He banks the fire himself, as always, and takes his candle and goes slowly to bed. The parley ground is a burned village south of the Trident, on land that belongs to no lord presently living. Whoever held it before the war came through, they are gone now, and what remains is a scorched frame of walls and a village square of packed earth, with a well that no longer draws water. It is visible from distance in every direction, which is why Tywin chose it. A man does not propose a parley at a location where he cannot see what is coming. They ride out in the early morning, Robb at the head with his close guard and his bannerman, Stevron behind them on a horse he does not particularly enjoy, and a road that confirms everything the Maester told him about, avoiding cold and travel. He does not think about the wound. He thinks about the road, and then about the village ahead, and then about the two men he is going to watch sit across a table from each other, which is sufficient to occupy him until they arrive. Tywin's party is already there when they come into sight of the village. 40 men in Lannister crimson, the lion banner hanging slack in the still air. Tywin himself sits his horse at the head with the ease of a man who has been sitting horses for 50 years, and Stevron can see him from 200 yards, can see the stillness of him, the particular quality of attention that he remembered from Harrenhal all those years ago. They ride in. The two parties face each other across the burned square. No one reaches for a sword. The convention holds. Robb Stark and Tywin Lannister look at each other. Stevron, from his position behind Robb's left shoulder, watches both of them. He has been looking forward to this particular observation since the parley was agreed, in the way that a man who has been working a problem for months looks forward to seeing the elements of it in the same room. Tywin is older than he was at the tourney at Harrenhal, but not smaller. Time has compressed him, rather than diminished him, as it does to certain men, pushing them downward into themselves until what remains is harder and denser than what was there before. He wears no armor, only riding clothes and a heavy cloak, and he sits his horse as though the horse is furniture he has arranged for his convenience. Robb looks younger than his age and older than his face, which is a contradiction Stevron has noticed before, and still cannot entirely explain. The grey eyes are level and give nothing. He has not slept well in days, Stevron knows, because the intelligence from the camp comes to him through Glover, and what it says is that the young king has been awake at odd hours and eating less than he should. But you would not know it looking at him. He sits his horse the way Tywin sits his horse, which is to say as though the horse is the natural extension of a body that has no uncertainty about where it is going. They dismount. Someone has placed a table and 3 chairs in the center of the square, which required planning and preparation and the hauling of furniture across broken ground, and this small fact, that Tywin thought to arrange chairs at a burned village before dawn, tells Stevron something about the seriousness of the offer that the Raven's words did not. Tywin speaks first. "You have the crossing," he says. "Your numbers have grown. You could be at the borders of the Westerlands within the month if you push." "Yes," Robb says. "I am not here to pretend otherwise." A pause, measured as a breath. "I am here because what you could do and what it would cost you are 2 different things. And because what I could resist and what it would cost me are 2 different things. And because the arithmetic of those 2 calculations produces the same answer." Robb says nothing. He has learned this, Stevron thinks, in the months of war. That the man who speaks into silence first is often the man who needs the other's response. He waits. Tywin sets out the terms. "The North governs itself. Completely," Robb Stark confirmed as Warden of the North by royal decree, unambiguous and hereditary. His own laws, his own taxes, his own garrison. Fealty to the crown in foreign matters only. No Lannister men quartered north of the Neck. The acknowledgement of Joffrey as king. Ned Stark's name cleared by royal proclamation. Sansa Stark returned north. When he finishes, Robb is quiet for a moment. He is sitting with his hands on the table in front of him and his back straight and his eyes on Tywin. And Stevron can see him working through the shape of the offer, the way Stevron told him to work through it, feeling the edges, finding where it stops being an offer and starts being a concession that conceals a different kind of advantage. "Why?" Robb says. Tywin looks at him. "Why now?" Robb says. "Why these terms? You had other plans. Whatever arrangement you made with the Freys, it was not a parley." He does not look at Stevron. "My Lord Frey declined to participate, and now you are sitting across a table from me, offering me the North." The quality of the air changes. It is a direct accusation, pointed at exactly the right place, and the directness of it lands in the silence like a stone dropped into water. Tywin looks for the first time at Stevron. Stevron looks back. He had been waiting for this since the parley was agreed. He meets it without moving. "Lord Frey made a calculation," Tywin says, "as lords do." He says it without heat and without embarrassment, in the flat way of a man acknowledging a fact that has no further use for decoration. Then he returns his eyes to Robb. "The calculation I made required certain elements. Those elements are no longer available. What I can offer instead is a settlement that costs both of us less than the alternative. That is the whole of it." Robb is still for a long moment. Stevron watches him sit with it. He can see the weight of it, the specific weight of a young man who went to war for his father's honor and his father's head, and who is now being offered something that looks very much like his father's position back, at the cost of a public acknowledgement of the man responsible for his father's death. That acknowledgement will be ash in his mouth. Stevron knows this. Tywin knows this. Robb knows that both of them know it. "A fortnight," Robb says. "My sister. Released within a fortnight of signing." 3 weeks, Tywin says. "A fortnight." He says it the second time, the same as the first, flat and complete, and Stevron hears in it the quality of a man who has already decided what he will and will not move on, and this is the thing he will not move on. Not the terms themselves, not the fealty, not his father's name. His sister. A fortnight. Tywin looks at him for a long moment. Then, a fortnight. They sign the preliminary compact at the table, in the cold, the clerks copying and sealing with the efficiency of men who have prepared for exactly this. Stevron witnesses it for the Frey side, a Lannister knight witnesses it for theirs, and the thing is done with less ceremony than its weight warrants, which is, in Stevron's experience, how the most consequential things are always done. As they prepare to remount, Tywin speaks once more. "Lord Stark," he says, the tone is precise, almost formal. "You understand that holding the North and governing it are different enterprises. Your father was a man who held things. You will need to be a man who governs them." Robb looks at him steadily. "I know that," he says. It is 3 words, and they carry a great deal. Stevron thinks it is the truest exchange of the morning, which has contained several true things. They ride back north in the flat grey light of midday. Stevron is behind Robb again, and behind him are the Frey riders who came as escort, and the road is long and cold, and the wound speaks steadily the whole way. He does not think about the wound. He thinks about what has happened. Something has ended. Not the war, entirely. Wars are slower to end than the agreements that end them, and there will be months of small violence and negotiation, and the particular friction of 2 armies learning to stop pointing at each other. But the thing that was possible before this morning, the worst version of what this war could become, the version where it goes on another 2 years and empties the riverlands of people, and Robb Stark dies at 30 the way young kings die in long wars, that version has been foreclosed. He does not know if it is enough. He is not certain that any settlement Tywin Lannister offers is worth the paper it is signed on, because Tywin's relationship with agreements is the relationship of a man who honors them precisely until the moment honoring them becomes less useful than breaking them. He thinks Robb understands this. He thinks Catelyn has told him, in the careful way she tells him things, that a settlement with a Lannister is a beginning of something rather than an end of something, and that what comes next is the harder work of making it hold. But it is signed. The compact exists. Sansa Stark will come north within a fortnight, and Ned Stark's name will be cleared by royal proclamation, and the army that crossed the Green Fork 3 days ago will not have to fight its way back across it. These are not small things. Robb rides ahead without looking back, which is the correct posture for a king returning from a negotiation he is not fully satisfied with, but has accepted. Stevron watches him from behind, watches the straight back and the grey cloak, and thinks about the boy who started this war and the man who is finishing it, and thinks they are close enough to the same person to be called the same person, and different enough that the difference is what matters. The road winds north. The twins appear in the distance, the 2 towers standing above the river, patient and grey. He is tired. He will rest when he gets home. The raven from Riverrun arrives on a morning when the first permanent frost has settled over the crossing, the kind that does not melt at noon and will not melt again until spring. Stevron reads the letter at his desk with the candle still burning, because the light has not fully come yet, and his eyes are not what they were. It is written in Catelyn's hand, steady and precise as it always is, and it says that Lord Hoster Tully died in the night, quietly, in his own bed, with his children beside him. Stevron sets the letter down and sits with it for a while. He had met Hoster Tully briefly when he came to Riverrun in the autumn, the old lord lying in his bed with his body arranged for dying and his eyes still sharp. Hoster had looked at him for a long moment and said, "You are not your father." And Stevron had said, "No, my lord, I am not." And Hoster had said, "Good," and then closed his eyes, which was all the conversation the old lord had left in him. He had died knowing the compact was honored. He had died knowing Roslin was at Riverrun, that his son had a wife, that the crossing was open, and the Freys were standing with the North. Catelyn's letter says this. Near the end, in the particular careful way she says things that matter to her. He died, I think, knowing that something had gone right. It is not nothing. It is not nothing. Stevron reads that line twice, and then folds the letter and sets it on the corner of his desk with the other letters he keeps there, the ones that need to be held rather than filed or burned. The pile has grown in the weeks since the parley. He is not sure what he will do with them eventually. Leave them for his son, perhaps, who will not know what to make of most of them, and will sort them into whatever categories his son uses for sorting, which will not be the categories Stevron uses, but will serve. He writes back to Catelyn that evening. He expresses his condolences for Hosta. He confirms that Edmure, as the new Lord of Riverrun, can depend on the Frey crossing in the coming months, that the bridge will remain open, that the Frey men who rode east with Robb's host have orders to return when the army disbands, and to return well, which is a kind of instruction he has given to soldiers his entire life, and which means, come home without having done anything I will have to answer for. He does not tell her that he is tired. He does not tell her about the mornings, the last several weeks of them, in which it has not been possible to sit upright until well past dawn, the wound making its specific claim on his attention before he is allowed to attend to anything else. The Maester has changed his tone. It is a small change, almost invisible to anyone who had not been listening carefully to Maesters for 63 years. But Stevron has been listening carefully to Maesters for 63 years, and he hears it clearly enough. There are things the Maester is no longer suggesting he avoid, because avoiding them has moved from the category of useful advice into the category of wishful thinking. He is not frightened by this. He is not certain he has the capacity left to be frightened of the things he always knew were coming. What he has is clarity, the particular clarity of a man who has finished most of what he set out to do and can see the rest from here. The compact holds. That is the fact he returns to in the mornings, the one he checks against whatever news the ravens bring, the way a man checks a dam after a night of rain. It holds. The preliminary terms were signed, and the formal document followed within the week, witnessed at Harrenhal on the Lannister side and at the Twins on his own, and sealed copies sent to the Citadel at Old Town as Robb demanded. It is as solid as paper and sealed wax can be, which is to say it is fragile in all the ways that agreements between powerful men are fragile, but it exists, and existing is not nothing. Sansa Stark came north on the 14th day. He knows this because Robb sent a raven to the Twins when she arrived at Riverrun, a brief raven, almost perfunctory, 3 lines, as though Robb was not sure what the correct length of a raven about his sister was, and defaulted to too short. But Catelyn also wrote, separately, and Catelyn's account is fuller. She writes that Sansa arrived thin and very straight, that she walked through the gates of Riverrun without faltering, that Robb was waiting in the courtyard and held her for a long time without speaking. That is the detail that matters. He held her for a long time. The household stood back and gave them the distance, and the rain came down, and after a while they went inside. Rose Bolton is another matter. Bolton did not write, as Stevron predicted, but the silence only worked for a time. 3 weeks after the formal compact was signed, letters surfaced in Bolton's correspondence with a Lannister contact in the Riverlands, letters that were specific enough about what had been planned for the Twins that no interpretation, except the correct one, was possible. Robb read them, according to Glover's report, in complete silence over the course of an afternoon, and then set them aside, and did not speak of what he intended for 3 days. When he acted carefully. Bolton was stripped of his command and his position in the host, and sent back to the Dreadfort under a guard that was styled as an honor, but was not. His movements are now watched. His correspondence is copied before it is carried. He is alive because executing a powerful lord on written evidence creates a martyr and a precedent and a complication. And Robb has learned, in this year of war, that the clean solution is rarely the cleanest solution once you count all the costs. Stevron thinks this is correct. He thinks Robb will have to deal with Bolton again, in some form, at some point in the years ahead. He thinks Robb knows this. He thinks it is the kind of problem that a lord who governs manages rather than solves, and that Robb is becoming, slowly and at a cost, a lord who governs. He stands from the desk with care and walks to the window. The frost lies on the courtyard below. His breath makes a cloud in the cold air of the study. The Meister will tell him not to stand in the cold, and he is not going to listen to the Meister about this, because the view from the window is the bridge and the river and the far bank, and standing at this window is not a comfort he is prepared to give up on the grounds that it is cold. The bridge holds. It always holds. It has held for 600 years through floods and sieges, and the particular neglect of men who cared more about the toll than the structure, and it will hold for 600 more, and the river will run under it regardless of who stands at this window watching. He thinks about what persists. He is 63 years old, and the Meister has changed his tone, and he is therefore in the position of a man who has occasion to think about this. The compact persists for now. The bridge persists. Roslin persists at River Run, learning the household, making Edmure laugh, building the life that Stevron pointed her toward, and that she is building herself, which is how it should be. Her children will persist when they come, which he thinks they will. They will grow up at River Run, knowing their grandmother's house kept its word when keeping it mattered. That is a thing that stays, a thing that shapes how a family tells its own story, and families that tell certain stories about themselves tend to behave in accordance with those stories, which is perhaps not the most reliable mechanism for civilization, but is one of the ones that actually works. He banked the letters his father left behind. He did not bank the ones he has kept on the corner of his desk. He supposes they will be there when his son comes to sit in this chair, and his son will read them and will not know what to make of most of them, and will perhaps set them aside and get on with managing the crossing, which is the right thing to do, and also, probably, what Stevron himself would advise. He goes back to the desk and opens the account books, because the accounts do not wait, not for parleys or compacts or the cold opinions of Meisters, and he reads through the numbers with the attention they deserve, which is his full attention, which he is prepared to give them for as long as he has it to give. Toward midday, a rider appears on the eastern road, small at this distance, alone, moving at the pace of news rather than emergency. An ordinary rider carrying ordinary correspondence, the regular traffic of a crossing that is known to be open and maintained and held by a lord who charges no toll. Stevron watches from the window as the rider reaches the gate, as the guard calls down, as the rider answers, as the gate opens. He turns from the window and goes to receive the message, walking slowly and steadily across the floor of his father's study, which is his study now, which will be his son's study after him, in a castle that stands on a river that runs on.